Argh, not another podcast about book publishing, hosted by William May, in which the author finds himself embroiled in a podcast about book publishing.
Okay.
Hello, and let me welcome everybody to this another episode of Argh.
Not another podcast about book publishing. Welcome, everyone.
Okay, so that's Maggie, and Denise is here as well. Hi, Denise.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
Well, it's an exciting time. I'm sure a lot of people know we're getting ready with the book just out, and we're getting ready for our first big event in New York at Pete's Candy Store. It's coming up in, a little over a week on the 13th of July, Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m. If anyone's in New York and would like to come, I'm sure that we would be more than happy to see you. And one of the things that's really exciting, I'm actually on the road right now. I'm pulled over at an outlet mall in St. Augustine, Florida, and sitting here under a sunshade as I talk to you from the side of the road, essentially. And I'm very excited because, we had a little bit of trouble figuring out exactly who we were going to have host the event on the 13th. And, there was a lot of questions because a lot of people aren't necessarily around in the summer, especially in New York. A lot of people travel, spend the weekends in the Hamptons or Cape Cod or wherever the hell they go. It was, we were having trouble finding someone. And then suddenly I got a phone call from my good friend Freesia McKee, who it happens was actually intimately involved when this chapbook was first forming. And she heard about the event and was like, I really want to come. And fortunately, we were able to work it out for her to be able to come. And she's going to be actually hosting and sort of conversing with me about the book. So we thought that, in advance of that, we'd take a chance to, sort of get a chance for my readers and the people who listen to the podcast to have a little bit of a heads up and get to know her a little bit. Hi, Freesia.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm so excited to get to be a part of this. Yeah,
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I live in Wisconsin, and so the weather here is lovely in the summer and just breezy and beautiful. Yeah.
How long have you...
Right?
What was that?
Yeah.
Sorry, Denise, what?
When we first said hello, her comment was that people are canoeing, and it's such a lovely word. First of all, canoeing. So, and it's a lovely thing that happens in Wisconsin. And so I said canoeing and kissing, and so she laughed, and we thought about it. There are two good things to do in the summer in Wisconsin:
canoeing and canoodling.
Yeah, you can't go wrong.
So, when I first met you, of course, you were living in Florida.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think you were still in graduate school at the time when we first met.
I was at Florida International University and their MFA poetry program. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great program.
It is a great program. Yeah, and I was thinking about when we first met, Palm Beach Poetry Festival was doing these kind of monthly community workshops throughout the year in addition to their main festival that was happening in January. And so I think when the very first time we met, I was teaching a poetry workshop through them, and you were one of the people in the workshop. And
I remember, I couldn't remember if that was when we first met or if that was after you had assisted in was it Gregory Pardlow's workshop?
It was Tim Siebel's. Yeah. That's
Tim
right.
Siebel's. Okay.
It's a great thing as a grad student poet to just get to be among famous poets and make photocopies for them. Yeah. But it's a good. Yeah. It's a really.
It's also. I mean, I would imagine also for you as someone who's teaching now, it must have been useful to have an opportunity to sort of sit in and, as I said, sort of shadow a professor who has real experience doing that and see what their process is. And I'm curious how that informed you as a teacher.
Yeah, and with MFA programs, usually you have the chance to go really in depth with a few mentor poets, right? But I feel like the usefulness of being able to be like sort of that teaching assistant at Palm Beach Poetry Festival was like you get also the breadth, right, of like getting to work with different people, even just for a short time. And poets have such different approaches to poetry, even if the end product is sort of has similarities, just everybody works so differently. It's constantly amazing to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I think also that like one of the things that I really appreciated about the Palm Beach Poetry Festival, which unfortunately it's not gone, but it's sort of transformed and moved to another area of the country. So it's not the same anymore. And unfortunately, I'm not able to be as involved. But one of the things that I always really appreciated was that they were I can't think of an event in terms of like a week that I was there when there wasn't really a sense that like you had poets from not only just like all around the world, but from every community that feels relevant to poetry, or at least, every community that they could include in that way,
Yeah.
That's very fortunate for you to have experienced that.
I had similar experiences when I was younger because I was involved. I went as an undergraduate to Sarah Lawrence, and they had a summer program. And in many ways, the program at the Palm Beach Poetry Festival, I think, was sort of modeled on that same thing, because it was Tom Lux, who had been the head of the Sarah Lawrence MFA and creative writing program, who was sort of the mentor guide when they were building the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. So I think that there was a lot of sort of overlap in spirit. And that was actually like, so I mean, I think that was something that I sort of, a place where we were able to sort of connect to begin with.
Definitely. Oh. Yeah, I have fond memories of that. And I love teaching Tim Siebel's poems in my classes now. And I always think of that time. Yeah.
Tim is also someone who I think it's just worth mentioning that he sort of has a long shadow in my life, because when I was a kid, he was a poet who came to my school to teach for a week. And I was in 7th grade and was like selected to take part in this like workshop with him. But
what school was it?
Collegiate in New York.
There you go. So I think what you said was interesting, Freesia. You mentioned how everyone writes so differently. And I would imagine that might be true for all types of writers, I would imagine. But I think the way you said it is interesting, because I think we all think of poetry sometimes in one way. And I've certainly learned a lot about poetry since working with William. So my question to you would be specifically about working with William. I know that you started working with him on the concept of Blaze Without Burning, becoming an actual chapbook. So would you be willing and okay to share with us a little bit about, how that process worked for you, how you worked a little bit? Because, it might be interesting for listeners to really understand how two incredibly talented and kindred spirits and poets from different, spaces in life and different, states come together. So could you share a bit about that experience, Freesia?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the first things that struck me when I met you is just the massive poetry background and sort of range of reading that you've done, and sort of just it's just always a delight to talk to you about poetry, because you have so many thoughts about so many different poetic things.
Well, I can say the same thing to you. So.
Oh, thanks. And that's what poets love about poets, right? We just we really like to talk shop. And sometimes we need to tell our non-poet friends or partners, when I'm with the other poets, we're just really going to be talking shop.
Well, I mean, it's funny. Carolyn Kaiser I was fortunate enough to be in a workshop that she came into for like a day. And she literally spent half the workshop talking about a single comma that she had spent an hour talking with like another poet about whether or not to include that comma. And we were all like, we get it, because that's the kind of thing, you know?
Right.
It's like the Yates line from Adam's Rib, you know, a line can take us an hour maybe, but if it doesn't seem like a moment's thought, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, my dad worked as a handyman for a long time, and like he would talk about, you know, tiling a bathroom or something, and if you make just a tiny mistake, people will notice it, right? But if you do it perfectly, people will just see a wall and won't notice it. And I think that's such a great metaphor for poetry also.
In other words, if someone makes a mistake, or I mean, because I sort of feel like, is poetry almost like you can't make a mistake with poetry to a certain extent?
I guess yeah, that's like maybe not the right word. I guess like if you place the comma so that it does a lot of work kind of seamlessly, people might not even notice the work that it's doing, right? Unless they do it a bunch of times. I guess that's a better word than mistake. Yeah, because it's not a mistake. And I also don't think it's a creative endeavor, right? There's not mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, there you go. You know, there's always, you know, one of the problems, and this is something that comes up in revision, is that there's no top and there's no bottom when it comes to like the quality of the work. You know, there's a range of work that's possible, and it's not always this choice is better than that choice, but sometimes right. It's what's going to serve a certain intention, and I think that's something that like to get back to Blaze Without Burning, I think that was part of the discovery process for that book, in a certain way. I mean, because at the time, you and I were working together. I think we started out, you were more sort of like, you know, as someone who's neurodiverse and has a lot of issues, you were kind of in a sort of semi-clerical role, just sort of like helping me get work organized for publication. And, you know, choosing poems to revise and things like that.
Right.
So I was going to ask, like, I'd like to know more about, like, how often did you meet? How was the collaborative, you know, for you, Freesia? Like, I know he spoke so highly of you, and he, you know, was so grateful and thanks you for helping at the very beginning stages. So what was it like for you? How often did you work? How many hours did you work? You know?
Yeah. I feel like we were working, we were meeting up. I was trying to think about this morning. Yeah, I think we were meeting once a month or maybe every other week, and we were emailing pretty frequently. And then the pandemic happened eventually, right? And then it was like remote work. But one of the things is like, because you're such a prolific poet, we were kind of sifting through a lot of work and trying to find points of connectivity between poems. That was a really interesting part of the process for me, because that factored into putting together packets to send out places, or trying to kind of figure out micro bodies of work within your larger, you know, all of your poems. And then when we started working on the chapbook, I remember this day really vividly, because it felt like it felt like things clicking into place, or like that satisfaction of when you're doing a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle, and you find the piece that fits. And so trying to figure out like the order of the poems and how they spoke to one another, and then like swapping out some poems for other poems. And then I remember when we got to the end of that process, we were both kind of like, we kind of saw what we had done at the same moment. And it was like, okay, this feels really, you know, really cohesive.
I think it started out with you sort of like, just intuitively, you were like, these poems feel like they thematically resonate. Mm-hmm. And I think that it began with like sort of a revision. Like we were looking at the poems sort of as a collection and sort of asking the question of like, you know, I know that like there's like places where even in that collection, 2 or 3 different poems sort of merged into a single poem as we were working on it and things like that. So, I mean, it's very hard to sort of like extricate that out. I think, you know, it was such an essential thing to find that core, you know, of the book, which I think
is that when the twinning came to be? When was the twinning moment? Because I mean, I'll share with Freesia. We were on a call with William, and it might have been a podcast, an earlier podcast. And then he was talking about the poems, and then he said the word twinning, like as a concept. And I try to share that with people as well when we're talking about the book and we put it in the press release and stuff. But like, when did you realize there was a twinning going on? And did you change titles? Like, I want to hear, Freesia, a little bit more about that nitty gritty part from your perspective.
I remember being on the hunt for a title. I remember, you know, we were doing some really hard investigations into each of the poems for a title. And a lot of your poems, the title is the first line of the poem, or the title sort of slides into the poem.
You know, when we actually submitted it real quick to Finishing Line Press, it was called Reflection. And then they sent back a note. Would you rethink the title? And then we were, okay, so we went through the same thing you went through, Freesia, like going back and forth and thinking and looking, and then we couldn't, you know, and then all of a sudden, William, as he does, have a blaze without burning, and we're like, oh yeah. You know?
You know, it's funny, there have been a few times working on this manuscript where things sort of just happened suddenly, and like I feel like that happened with the title. I think it happened while we were actually like figuring out how to put the book together. Because I think, as you were saying, we were sort of looking for titles for poems. And I think what sort of happened is that like, we realized that there were like a couple of poems that we were like, oh, this title works for both of these poems. And I think once it happened it was much easier to be like,
oh, I was about to ask that. That's how it happened.
I think, as I recall, I mean, it was sort of an organic moment that just sort of built. And you know, it's funny, it's like, you know, sometimes when when the right solution appears to you, all the rest of it disappears. You go, okay, I know this is right, like I get it now. It's like when we were looking for a cover for the book, and we started looking at paintings, and as soon as that painting that's on the cover now like came up, it was like, that's the right picture. You know, there wasn't a question anymore.
Yeah, and Freesia, I don't know if you know this. I mean, it's a Florida artist, and William has known about him, and so it's actually called Untitled, which I think is quite appropriate. It's not. So now we're going to relate it to Blaze Without Burning. It's like we adopted this piece of art.
I love that so much. Yeah.
It's all that's what it comes. A lot of providence and kismet and fate and faith and hope and all that stuff. But I'm gonna continue to ask you a few questions, a little bit more, Freesia, about you know, as far as, and I don't know if you don't think it matters to listeners, but like when you're working on a process like this, is it a weekly process? Did you work every week? Did you work every 2 weeks? Was there a time? Did you schedule times to work, like an hour here or 2 hours here? Like, you know, the meat and potatoes, or if you don't, you know, the broccoli and potatoes, if you don't.
Yeah, I think we started out, so I was living in North Miami, and I would take the train up to Boca Raton to see William. And this is kind of a funny part of the story, but I didn't have a car at the time, so I would ride my bicycle to the bus stop. I would take the bus stop to the train station. I would get on the train. The train was sometimes, the lower level of the train was sometimes flooded with sewage. This is the public transit infrastructure of South Florida.
Welcome to Florida.
Yes, you'd have to go up to the upper level to you know, the safe level of the train, and then I'd go up to Boca Raton, and then Will would pick me up at the train station. And I also remember, Will, that Weird Al was always playing on your CD deck.
Oh,
in your car.
No, I think at the time that was,
which I always loved. Because it was like, okay, let's get this party started. Let's get this poetry party started. And so I think this was happening once a month. And I feel like we'd spend a whole afternoon
Yeah, I think we can pretty much spend most of the day. You'd come down
whole day. Got it.
you'd probably come down you'd probably leave probably around 10 and get down sometime between 11 and 12. And then I think most of the time I'd wind up driving you home. Rather than you having to take the train back. Well, I mean, honestly, at a certain point, it was easier. Melissa and I would get in the car, we'd drive you home, we'd stop somewhere for dinner on the way back. A few times you and Miami. We all had dinner together a few times. So it was the thing is, it was work, but it was also, I think for both of us, it was an opportunity to sort of as you said, when you get to sit down and do that kind of deep poetry dive with someone else who has that passion, I don't think it feels like work. I think it feels like we're having a party, Yeah.
Yeah, it was really enjoyable. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it's familiar too, almost family-like. And again, you talked about poets and how there is sort of a community and is sort of family-like. And you all say each other's different people's names as if you know them very well. So it sounds like it is a very, very kind of, if I might add the word lovely, community, because everyone's sort of supporting each other and reading each other's work. And that kind of, thanks for sharing the process. I think that's really cool. So you work the whole day and then you go back and work when was another time that you felt you needed to do more work on something. So it was very,
in between, I would sort of be sending you poems that I would as I think everyone knows, I write every day. I write a bunch of poetry. And so there were times when I would be okay, Freesia, here's 10 poems this week that I've written, out of the poems or whatever it was. And Freesia would start looking at them and, pick a few to be okay, here's a few. And sometimes she would be sending me stuff hey, these poems I think make a good packet. Here's some journals that let's focus on trying to get some work sent here or there. And cool. I think a lot of it was sort of in between those times, we were both sort of looking at the work and trying to keep the fire lit, as it were. But it was really when we got together, it was that intensity of being able to actually sit down and get into it,
I get that. And it's interesting too that you, especially because during COVID, that there was an in-person part of the whole process as well. The whole in-person, it wasn't all done remotely. You connected as well in person. So you had the time together working, then you have the time together in the car, and you have the time together with Weird Al. But I'm going to ask a real quick question. So as far as your experience, because I want to learn a little bit more about your work as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would really love, can I well, let's start with just a few sort of questions that are just sort of general poet questions that I have for you. Here's one that I think is, can you remember the first poem you ever fell in love with?
Oh, this is such a beautiful question. Thank you for asking this. So I remember discovering Denise Duhamel's book Smile when I was in high school. And there was the entire book is available online for some reason on kind of an old school early 2000s or maybe 1990s website where it's just one really, 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 really long web page.
That's so iconic of that era.
It really, yeah. And I don't know why or how the whole book is online, but I don't remember how I encountered it. Wait, before
you go on, I think it's important to mention where Denise Duhamel teaches.
Exactly. Yeah. So she ended up being my mentor in grad school at Florida International University, which is just a wild, 10
swing,
to 20 year arc.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
So cool. Yeah. And I when I first encountered her work, I never knew you could make art about your ordinary life like that. I never knew you could just sort of write about and again, I was in high school, so writing about being mad at your parents or feeling like the world doesn't understand you or just feeling kind of uncomfortable in your skin or whatever it is. I didn't know you could write about that kind of stuff. And so it was I really held that work close for a long time. And then when I was in my mid-20s trying to figure out like where to, okay, I think I want to go to poetry grad school. I think I want to, do some intensive learning about this. I was like, where does Denise Duhamel teach? So she taught at FIU. And then when I learned that Julie Marie Wade, who's also a favorite poet of mine, taught at the same school, I was like, oh my gosh, like I definitely have to apply there. And so that's what brought me to South Florida in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting because South Florida is kind of a very different landscape for you, I think.
Yeah, and it was funny because I had moved around a little bit, but was born and raised in Milwaukee and had pretty much just lived in Wisconsin. And when you're immersed in your own environment, you don't necessarily think about it in the way that you do after you leave. So then when I got to Florida, I feel like in my program, I was like the Midwest poet, which
Right.
and I totally embraced that feedback. And then it's been really interesting. So I've been out of grad school for 5 years now, and I'm back in Wisconsin. It's good to leave. It's good to do something different because you have a perspective when you go back. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, what do you think are the things that make a poet Midwestern?
That's a
No,
great
I mean that as a serious question, as much as it's, but you know what I mean? Like, because there are definitely poets, like I can think of poets who are from New York who I would never think of as New York poets.
Right. And that's a great question. And I think it was Essay Daily did a special feature about this a couple years ago because they were asking, first of all, like, what is the Midwest and what makes Midwestern writing? And so I teach at University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, which is a small regional campus. And some of my colleagues edit a literary journal called the Midwest Review. And there's this kind of running joke that we all have, like, no more poems about tractors, please. Like, sure, that's one Midwest. But, for me growing up in Milwaukee, it's like Milwaukee and its suburbs are it's a city of 1 million people. So there's not a lot of tractors there, right? Yeah.
But then there's always those poems that do something with something like that shock you. Like, what is that poem about driving down the road and she sees the truck full of chickens and there's like one chicken trying to escape the truck and it's just this amazing, I can't remember who it is right now, but there's this amazing poem and it's just like one of these things where it's like so small. But it's the kind of thing where it's like, those moments in your life where nothing happened and yet somehow it's extremely profound.
Yeah.
I was going to ask Freesia, so can you tell us a little bit about your own experience being a published writer? Like, what was that like for you? Especially because your first time being published. Now, this is William's first time with Blaze Without Burning. Share a little bit about the process. What you went through, how you worked with, people at the house, the publishing house. And and I also, just to give me an idea.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that question. So the publishing world is vast and varied and can feel very mysterious. And I feel like for even writers who have been in it for a long time, every situation in publication is a little bit different. And so it's a complex part of being a writer. I have 3 chapbooks that I have published, and the first one was published with Headmistress Press, which is focused on publishing work by lesbians and queer women.
And what's it called? So, you could give the titles, please.
Oh, yeah, of course. So my first chapbook is called How Distant the City. And I sent it out kind of on a whim right before I started grad school. And I, had sent this chapbook to not as many places as my other work. I think I'd sent it to 5 or 10 different places, which is pretty low based on my experience since then. And they are just really lovely to work with. It's run by a few women. Mary Merriam designs the books, and then Risa Dedenberg kind of does the business side of the press. And so they were just lovely to work with. I wanted a photograph that I had taken to be on the cover. We did a little bit of editing of the poems but pretty minor stuff. I feel like most chapbook publishers want, for the most part, the work to be ready to go, right? Like maybe, as you mentioned earlier, there's a suggestion of a change in title or some formatting stuff, but most chapbook publishers, I don't think, want to make really immense changes. Yeah. And then,
I mean, I think that's also a function of just, as we're talking about the business, I think a lot of the chapbooks, there's not as robust a sort of editorial side to the interaction because just cost.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so true. So the chapbook, How Distant the City came out my first semester of grad school, which was kind of an unusual position to be in, but I had taken some time off after undergrad. And so I did a launch party at Books and Books, the kind of local Miami bookstore, which was just really cool. And there were two other poets who read with me, Corey Ginsberg and what is her? Oh, the Corey Ginsberg read from her chapbook, The Cold Side of the Pillow, and then Kathleen Chambliss read from her book, Necromantic. So it was just really cool to get to read with my friends. I think that was just an exciting part of that. And then there were, a few years where I was writing a lot and I was a finalist in different things, but none of the chapbook manuscripts were getting accepted. And then in 2023, Bottlecap Press accepted my second chapbook, Hummingbird Vows, and that was a pretty different it was a very enjoyable process too, but it was a pretty different process in that it was very rapid between the acceptance and the publication. But that's run kind of a one-man show run. He happens to live Hollywood, California. And so my colleague had ordered my chapbook and her 10-year-old son said, "Mom, we've got mail from Hollywood," which is really funny to me. But he does a lovely job at Bottlecap Press. Designing the covers, and they're sort of, they're very nicely made, but it's like a stapled chapbook, different style of chapbook.
I get the feeling that for him, it's much more of an art project.
It is definitely. Yeah. Which is a great.
Oh, no, I mean, that's awesome.
So were you able to do one of the things I was thinking about, and maybe, you two can discuss it, and I want to hear about the third book, because I think you said there were 3 chapbooks published so far, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
One that just came out.
Oh, which one is that, Freesia?
So City of Honesty is my third chapbook, and that came out in April 2025, just a few months ago.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's exciting. And that was a really different project because it was kind of a mix of poems that are a few years old and poems that were newer. But that one is with Water's Edge Press, which was a third. Again, very enjoyable and completely different process. So Water's Edge Press had a new chapbook series that was the Calliope chapbook series that's focused just on publishing Wisconsin poets. And they work with some undergrads at Lakeland University, which is here in Wisconsin, who are working with the professionals in the process. So that was another really neat part of the process was, it was professionally produced by people who've been doing this a long time, but then there were these sort of mentees who were undergrads who were part of the process as well, which was just a lovely, lovely community to be a part of.
And it sounds like like you said, all 3 experiences for being published were very different, just like you started when we first started the conversation today. Poets all write so differently. So it's interesting that they coincide. The publishing sensibility, the publishing, I guess you say, environment, and how they look at poetry and what they feel their purposes when it comes to poetry and sharing. And that's my next question, and this is going to be my last question, would be, how have you worked in the world of getting your book attention? Is press easy to get for poetry? Has it been challenging for you? Like, where does that all fit in? And how do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's very cumulative. So I feel like being a poet involves a lot of days where nothing happens per se, right? You do your writing, you talk with your colleagues and friends, you send the work out, but nothing big happens on that day. But then you stack up hundreds or thousands of those days where nothing happens, so to speak, but you're doing the work and you're in the process. And so at this point in my life, I, especially with this most recent chapbook, have just really leaned on and celebrated the different connections that I have had. And also because this most recent chapbook is focused on, or the series through which it was published is focused on Wisconsin poets. I've just done a lot of events in Wisconsin with different bookstores that I've been associated with, different reading series, and as we've kind of touched on multiple times throughout this conversation, the poetry world is really about community, right? So it's like, oh, this is a friend that, we met each other in our early 20s and, now we're older. We both look really different than we used to. Like we're doing different things, but we, let's collaborate. Let's do a reading together.
That's so cool. It sounds to me too, like it's really about, it's like for the love of poetry.
Really
I don't know if other writers that may be listening, it's because a lot of times the one thing that you see a lot when it comes to publishing, at least, my own experience has been a bestseller and this person bestseller. Now it's going to be a movie and it's going to be this. And they're trying to put so much commerce behind publishing oftentimes. But for me, it seems like what I'm hearing, especially, is that poetry writing and publishing is about love of poetry, not necessarily about expecting to, maybe go on a vacation, maybe from the income, maybe like instead of, maybe 2 towns away from where you live. I don't know. You know what I mean? So it's really, it's an honorable profession. It's a wonderful thing because similar to musicians and music, we do it for the love of it,
Absolutely. And, I talk about this with my undergrad students a lot, and we're not in this poetry class because we're going to, make our fortunes off of the poems that we write. But that is kind of liberating because it allows us to write the work that we really, really want to write instead of writing work that we think will sell.
It's very hard. Like nobody is sitting around making movies out of poems generally. Like, and if they were to try to, they'd be very experimental is my guess.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
that could be interesting. Like about that.
Well, I mean, honestly, I can think of a few poems that have been made into movies, and I think they're all Poe. It's like there's a movie based on The Raven. That's not really based on The Raven. There was that movie Patterson a few years ago.
I remember
that was sort of, it wasn't really based on the Williams poem, but it was sort of nodded at the Williams poem, I guess. Well, Maggie, we haven't heard from you. I'm curious if you have any, you're always in there listening. I'm sure you have some thoughts.
Yeah, we kind of agreed with, I prepared the questions and I was like, Denise, I think you would be better coordinating this, moderating and coordinating this conversation. I had, William asked the question of what is your favorite, what was the first book when you fell in love with poetry? And from all your work, what was the book or the chapbook or one of your work that was like your favorite project and the one that you had probably the most challenge like getting through? And could be the same, could be too different, but I was just curious about that.
Thanks for that question. That's a lovely question. I think one of my favorite projects that I've worked on is an unpublished book, yet to be published book rather, called I Did Not Think I Would Be Homesick Here. And it's a bunch of eco poems. And so I had this 1 semester fellowship at Ripon College, this small liberal arts college, pretty close to where I live now. And the fellowship was great because you just teach 1 poetry class and then the rest of the time you get paid to write. And so, it was really wonderful. And so of all of my time, including grad school, right? Because grad school, you're balancing a bunch of stuff, but probably of any time in my life, I just had so much time to write. So it's like, I would show up in the morning, write for a few hours, take a nature walk, which fed into the nature poetry aspects of the book, and then just keep working. So that was just gratifying because I really got to immerse myself in that project. And the most challenging project, I have been returning recently to another yet to be published chapbook project that doesn't have a title yet, but it is a series of poems about caring for my dad after he survived a stroke. And we were doing 24/7 home care, and which is it's just exhausting to do that kind of caregiving. And so revisiting those memories has been challenging, but also the format of the poems it's just one really, really long, tedious sentence that goes on and on and on and on to try to mimic how tiring it is to take care of a parent who needs a lot of care. And it's like, I'm happy to be participating in this care, but I'm so exhausted. And so that's a tiring project to work on. Yeah, I need to just do it in small doses. Yeah.
It never ends project. Or to a certain extent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing. And I'm going to also segue now because we're running a little bit out of time, and I want to ask you, Freesia, from your new book that was just published in April 2025, would you please honor us to close the podcast with one of your poems? Would you read one for us?
Yes, I would be more than happy to. I have a copy just over here, so let me grab it.
Sure.
All right.
So before you read it, do you want to tell us a little bit about the book? Is it as a collection? Is it?
Yeah, so the book is called City of Honesty. It has a map on the cover. That's one of my poetic obsessions, is cartography and maps. And so I'm thinking about how all poems are small cities of honesty. I'm also thinking about how cities are poems, and they have juxtapositions and contradictions and complications.
I was going to ask you, because it's interesting to me, you have 3 chapbooks out, and 2 of them already have city in the title. So it feels like that's in some way an obsession.
It's a tell. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it gives away my obsession for sure. So there's a few different poems kind of festooned periodically throughout the book that all have the same title, Love in a Time of Fascism. And so another sort of framing premise of the book is the speaker, saying to the person the poems are addressed to, even though we're not in love anymore, we're still in solidarity with one another. We still both want to see a better world. And so kind of having that common understanding, even through heartbreak. So I'll read the very last poem of the collection today. Love in a Time of Fascism. You have no idea how much I love you, how much I need your voice. With frost on the grass and scary morning radio, you have no idea. With the blusters that almost swept me off my bike, going to work with the youngest activists we know. No idea how much I need to hear your heartbeat through your dance moves. In your sigh, your coughs, your shudderings, I hear your breath and need this solidarity of presence for as long as you will give it. The slap of the back door, your bike lock as you chain to mine, the scraping of your chair legs, the sound of steam off various pots of soup, above the punk fundraiser in a basement where you drop change into the bucket against another war. You have no idea when you say you can't focus on anything else. There are genocides, dictators, and deportations, shootings in all bleak seasons, your unsure jaw shaking, so tender and your own. Is there any way to tell you how precious, how I hold you, a raw jewel, a pumpkin seed, how much I need your unsure gait, stilted and aflame, your worries, a wall of grapes. I want to spit the sour out, ferment every acrid thing into a cup of liquid drinkable. I want you to remember there are moments I need nothing more than your voice when it is feeble. To know you are a survivor makes my survival possible.
Wow. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Every word. Yes. Congratulations. That's the final poem in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. City of Honesty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wisconsin. I think we all got to go to Wisconsin right now. We got to do some canoeing, some loving, some appreciation. That was scary. So
where can people go to buy the book?
Yeah.
So people can go, to the Water's Edge Press website, or there's a link on my own website, FreesiaMcKee.com.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was beautiful to hear.
Beautiful, fascinating, the whole 9 yards. And I can't believe that we're gonna be meeting you and seeing you in New York. Are you excited about your trip, Freesia?
So excited. Yeah, so excited. So I'm excited to see Will and meet you all, and it's just going to be a great time.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody, especially Freesia. It was a pleasure to talk, and I'm looking forward to being able to sit down together and gorge ourselves on poetry, as we are wont to do. I hope everyone has enjoyed this episode. I know it was a great conversation for us. And, if you enjoyed it, please tell your friends about it. If you did not enjoy it, tell your enemies.
William, where can people sign up for the event to see you and Freesia live?
So the event is being held at Pete's Candy Store. I think we have a sign up on the website on WilliamMayWrites.com.
Yeah.
And if you get the newsletter, I think you might even have a little RSVP invitation in your email. Awesome. And the book is currently available, Blaze Without Burning, at bookstores, available through bookstores everywhere, as it were.
Okay, so everybody, I'll see Freesia, I'll see you in Manhattan. Will, I'll see you in Manhattan. And Mickey, I'll see you on the phone.
Sounds good.
Peace.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Argh, Not Another Podcast About Book Publishing, is produced by Denise Marsa, Maggie Dimitrova, and William May. Please visit WilliamMayWrites.com for social media links, recited poems, and more.